Welcome to the Foul Play YouTube channel. Today we have for you a presentation on the mysterious Audiovox cell phone that a lot of people think might be an important clue in the case, but like so many other clues, didn't receive appropriate follow-up from law enforcement. But let's start this story from the beginning and ask ourselves the following questions over the course of this presentation. Why is this phone important? Where was it found? Who found it? Who took it into evidence? How did it become an issue at Stephen's trial? Are there any notable discrepancies between the phone and how the phone was documented? What can we tell about this phone? What might have been possible to learn about this phone at the time? And is there anything that could still be learned? The phone itself was taken into evidence as evidence tag 8451. And for the first time, we're actually able to see a photograph of that phone. Thank you to the newly released photographs. What's most interesting about this phone is where it was found. It was found in a ditch near the turnaround shown in the slide. This turnaround is just east of Ridge Road on State Highway 147. And what's suspicious about this location is that 4 people reported seeing a car matching the description of Teresa's RAV4 parked in this turnaround between 1 and 3 November. One of the people, Kevin Ramlau, has recently submitted an affidavit to Kathleen Zellner, and that affidavit indicated that he reported, he saw the RAV, or the car matching the description of the RAV, and he reported its position to a Manitowoc County police officer who he later, after seeing ma'am all those years later, identified as Sergeant Andrew Coburn. And this guy also, Kevin Ramlow, also happens to be friends with Scott Tadich. And he sent a text to Scott Tadich later indicating that, hey, you know, I saw this car there. And he actually saved that text from 2005 to be able to show to Kathleen Zellner as part of his affidavit. You can see photos of that text online. So that's very interesting that you should find a phone near that spot where potentially Teresa's RAV might have been. Lastly, many of you guys are probably familiar with our fellow YouTube member, my personal good friend Millbilly, who's done some excellent work on the dispatch calls. And you can hear some of the dispatch calls reporting the presence of the RAV4 at this turnaround on his YouTube channel. And we'll leave a link to his video with one of the dispatch calls in the description. And just to put the distances in perspective, you can see on this slide that the turnaround, which would be the end of the blue line on the right-hand side, is only a few minutes from the Avery salvage yard, which would be on the left hand of that slide, and that road that's going north to south is Avery Road. Can anyone out there guess who found the phone? You got it. It was Pam of God herself. Let me read for you this trial testimony, which is the cross-examination of Pam by attorney Jerry Buting. Question: do you remember being called to an area near the river, a turnaround near the river, by one of those individuals from the bar area to look at some? Answer: I know we had searched around the river area, and then at that point we, meaning one of the bar owners in town, said he would come down and help me out. And on the search, we found a cell phone. Question: and what was that bar owner's name? Answer: I don't recall. There seems to be a lot of that going around in this case. Question: do you know an individual by the name of John Campion? Answer: I'm not sure if that was his name or not. Question: okay, you found a cell phone down by the river. Answer: yes. Continuing with the testimony, question: also some business papers, some sort of papers nearby? Answer: I don't recall any papers. Question: but that cell phone, you thought that might be important. Answer: I thought perhaps it was important. For all you know, it could have been Teresa's, right? Answer. It could have been. Question. So what did you do? Answer. I called the sheriff's department and someone came down and photographed the cell phone. Probably very easy for her to call the sheriff's department since she had Pagel's phone number given to her by Ryan Hillians, right? But by all coincidences in the universe, what Manitowoc County officer should come down to photograph the cell phone? One that we've never heard of? Good luck with that. None other than Andrew Coburn himself, ready with his camera to take pictures of the Audiovox cell phone, those pictures of which I have never seen and doubtfully will ever see the light of day again. But nonetheless, it was him that came down to take them. Now, this testimony actually took Ken Kratz by surprise because he hadn't heard of this cell phone. And later that day, with the jury present, as they were wrapping up at the end of the day, there was a discussion about this in front of the judge, but without the jury. Now, let me read from you that discussion from the trial transcript. Attorney Buting. Judge, before we do that, I do want to clear up a couple of things. I want to make a specific renewed discovery request on 2 items, because until today, I was not aware, have not actually received any reports from any Manitowoc or Calumet County Sheriff's Office about this search that Ms. Sturm was involved in down by the Mishicot River area, where a cell phone was found. Photographs apparently were taken and the phone was seized. There's no reports of that activity anywhere in any of the discovery that we have received. Kratz responded to this. Lastly, this cell phone down by the river is the first I've heard of this. Certainly never came through our office, never was provided by our office as part of discovery because I don't have anything from that. And that's from the trial testimony, page 248. This discussion continued. Attorney Buting, I would ask, if counsel is just discovering the cell phone incident today, and the way she described it, obviously there was some sort of police involvement that perhaps overnight he could check with probably Manitowoc and see what's up with that. Attorney Kratz, perhaps Mr. Buting would like to do that. It's not in my possession, Judge. The court. How did this come to light? How did you know to ask the questions about it, Mr. Buting? I guess I'm at a loss. I don't know how it got started. Attorney Buting, we get tips too, just like they do. Sometimes useless, sometimes not. This one sounded like maybe it might be more legitimate, so I thought I would ask about it. But I had no confirmation of it until today. She clearly described a police action of some sort. To say that it's not in his possession, Manitowoc officers are testifying for the state. They have been involved in critical parts of this case in terms of evidence that was discovered. So I think he does have an obligation under Brady, potentially, to get to the bottom of this, to find out if this is something that was never even documented. Manitowoc never even wrote a report, or did they write a report and we just haven't received it? Well, if we turn to the CASO, page 185, and I should point out that when I say page 185 of the CASO document, that's the document as we have it right now. It's not clear to me how it was assembled when it was delivered to Jerry Buting and Dean Strang during the trial. But if you look at the CASO report right now, it's near the beginning, page 185. And I doubt that they would miss that on page 185. It describes the discovery of that on 11/09/05 by Deputy Craig Wendling, along with Manitowoc County Sergeant Andy Coburn and James Link. Wow, where do we know those names from? The discoverers of the key. At 1450 hours, we arrived on scene just east of Ridge Road on State Highway 147. In the north ditch, right along the gravel line, was an Audiovox phone, silver in color, model CDM 8815UT Star Cam. The item was found by a person searching, his name being John J. Campion, date of birth of 7/24/56. His address is provided as well as his home phone number. That item would have been collected by me at 1452 hours and given tag number 8451. Well, unfortunately, CDM 8815 is not a valid number for an Audiovox cell phone, so we might have to do a little bit deeper digging on that. So I did a little bit of hunting around the internet for Audiovox cell phone model numbers that were at least close to this model number 88815 that was reported in the CASO document. And came across this phone, the Audiovox CDM 8615, that bears a startling resemblance to the Audiovox phone found by Pam Sturm and John Campion. There are some very interesting things that are worth pointing out from the picture. The first thing that you'll notice is a picture of the phone in this slide, and the battery is off the back. The battery cover are sort of one piece that slides down off the back. And there's an interesting set of numbers that are revealed when you take the back off of that phone. And I'm going to zoom into those numbers on the next slide in the chart, in the presentation. And what you see here is first, the model number that I point out is the CDM 8615 for this phone. And it does have that designation at the end of it, PP, that stands for prepaid. And I'll have something to say about that in a minute. But perhaps the more interesting set of numbers are those that are in the yellow box, which are essentially the numbers that you would need if you were going to subpoena the phone company, the network operator on which this phone operated, if you wanted to find out things like the phone number or perhaps any other information that was tied to that phone. And what's also very interesting is that the name that's reported in the CASO is very different from the name that you find on the back of the phone. As a matter of fact, being from the cellular industry, I'm very familiar with the company UT Starcom, Korean company that makes these phones. The CASO reports that the phone is named something like UT Starcam. It's almost as if that they're trying to mislead you by indicating that the name of this phone is sort of highlighting this new and fancy camera that they have. It's the Starcam. But that's not the case. It's very clear from the information on the back of the phone that this company is UT Starcom. As a matter of fact, I've also provided for you on the slide just a download of the Audiovox logo from the internet. You can clearly see Audiovox Communications, a division of UT Starcom Incorporated. In my mind, there's no way that you can look at this label or any label that's going to be like it and mistake the UT Starcom, which is the company name, with the with being part of the model number. And this sort of morphing of the UT Starcom name into UT Starcam, which kind of obfuscates things a little bit, is very questionable, and one wonders how they could get it so wrong. So I asked myself, what could that possibly be? Moreover, it is clearly not 8615. 8815, as they say. I personally called Audiovox technical support and asked them about a model number 8815. That model 8815 does not exist. There's no such model number. And we just have to ask ourselves, is this yet more deliberate obfuscation that's meant to throw us off? And there's a way in this case where if they want things to be buried, they find a way to bury them. Very importantly, as we see pictures, and I'll show a couple of pictures in a second, and we saw from the picture of the phone in the front that there is no other place on the phone where the model number is written. It's just not. The only place that you can find it is when you take off the battery and look at it. And when you do that, as I have in the picture that I have inset here on the slide, the numbers are right there. The numbers that you need to write a subpoena to a phone company are right there. And there's no evidence, there's no report given that any type of subpoena for information was given to any mobile network operator to find out any information about this phone at all. And that's why people think that this is an important piece of evidence that was just left to rot. So there was more than one picture of the Audiovox phone in the recently released set. Of course, these are not the pictures that were taken by Andrew Coburn. And of course, there's none of the back off where we can see those numbers exposed so that we could possibly have Kathleen Zellner write a subpoena to any phone company about this, okay? But the new insights that we have on this, and they're at least marginally interesting, is, it's not necessarily what you see in that picture, it's what you don't see. You don't see a carrier name stamped on that phone. My eyes aren't that good, but also, does anybody see any fingerprint dust on that phone? As to who might have used that? I can't see any of that fingerprint dust. And we do still have to speculate as to which company supplied that phone. So let's dig into that just a little bit. First, we zoom into the evidence tag. At least some of this stuff matches. You can see that's evidence tag 8451. John Campion is the guy that Attorney Buting mentioned in the trial testimony. Pam of God was unable to confirm that name. Interestingly, John Campion is also very good at finding things, almost as good as Pam of God. John Campion happened to be the one that found a woman by the name of Deb Sukawati's dead body in a quarry near the Avery's house. Deb Sukawati was the aunt of someone named Carmen Botwell. And the name of the deputy matches the CASO description, Deputy Wendling. Well, what in particular can we tell from looking at the pictures? Well, as I said before, it's usually the big guys, the big phone companies, the Verizons, the AT&Ts, they will typically mark their phone with their corporate logo. So this phone was not likely sold by any of the biggies, Verizon, AT&T, Sprint, Virgin Mobile. These big companies are typically referred to as mobile network operators, or MNOs. One of the characteristics of MNOs is they tend to own their own equipment. In other words, they own the cell towers, they own the network infrastructure, and the core networks. This phone, which they couldn't even be bothered to stamp their own logo on, was likely sold by a smaller type of company called, referred to as a mobile virtual network operator, or people in the business would call it an MVNO. And they typically don't own the towers of the cellular infrastructure. An MVNO will typically buy lots of subscriptions from a big company at a volume discount, and they'll sell those back to the consumer at a lower cost than the consumers can get it from from an AT&T or Verizon, and only allow themselves a small profit working on the margins. So the fact that this phone didn't have a big corporate logo stamped on it indicates that it's from one of these MVNOs. Does that still help us at all? Is there a way to figure out what network itself the phone worked on? And my answer to that is it probably worked on Verizon Wireless. And why do I say that? Well, there were competing cellular standards at the time. And those standards were the following. There was the European second generation cellular, which was often referred to as GSM, which is an acronym for the Global Systems for Mobile. 3G cellular signaling was emerging at the time. The European standard was referred to as UMTS, or the Universal Mobile Telephony System. And those were European standards. As a matter of fact, Teresa's phone and her singular account was a 2G GSM account. In the United States, particularly Verizon Wireless, used a technology referred to as CDMA 2000. CDMA, for those who care, stands for Code Division Multiple Access. What that means is beyond the scope of this presentation. But that CDM designator that you see in the model number, CDM 8615, is most probably a reference to that CDMA standard. And Verizon was the largest network operator operating in the area that employed that underlying technology. So most likely this is a phone sold by an MVNO that had a relationship with Verizon. One of the interesting things about Verizon was at the time, and even through about 5 years ago, Verizon phones did not use SIM cards. So those of you who are familiar with the way that SIM cards work in Europe or perhaps in other countries, the Verizon network did not use them, and they had slightly different terminology than you see in some of the other standards. So don't be surprised if I don't use terms like IMSI and IMEI when I talk about this phone. It's those numbers on the back that were below the model number that would be important. So even if we can't identify the MVNO, because they probably had a relationship with Verizon, Verizon for sure would have been able to, at the time, correlate the information on the back of this phone to an actual phone number. There's no doubt about that. It's still an open question as to whether they could still do that from a phone in 2005. But I wouldn't be surprised if someone on Zellner's team would want to give a call to Verizon and ask them if they could do that. We might understand whether it's actually worth it to get this phone out of evidence and perhaps get a picture of the numbers on the back of that phone. Obviously, there's no evidence as to any follow-up by law enforcement on this. There's no reports in the CASO, etc. It's even unknown as to whether this phone is even still in evidence. One thing also that I think is very important to point out was that some of the people on the prosecution team indicated that this phone was a burner phone. And although it's hard to find the documentation as to whether or not the phone was actually labeled PP, which stands for prepaid, I wouldn't be surprised if that was the case. But one thing that we know about this phone, and this was a very popular phone that was used by several mobile network operators, is that you can download the manuals for this phone at the time. And all the manuals really indicate that the phone worked in the same way for most of the network operators. And there is a little tidbit here about what you need to do for a prepaid account to sort of top off your minutes. When you want to pay more, what do? This is actually a cut from the Virgin Mobile version of the phone, and we know it was not Virgin Mobile because Virgin Mobile stamps their phones with a logo. But if you look at the manual for the phone when it's provided by other manufacturers, it's basically the same kind of language when it comes to sort of replenishing the cash on your phone. Okay, let me read what the manual says. You can top up your account over the air. To top up your account over the air using your phone, you need a credit card registered with Virgin Mobile and service on your phone. Top up is how you add money to your Virgin Mobile account. It's like filling up your gas tank before you hit the road. You can top up your account right from your phone, but first you'll have to buy a top-up card from one of the thousands of stores that carry them or register a credit card with Virgin Mobile. Well, very interesting. Our friends on the prosecution team told us, this is a burner phone. There's nothing we can learn about this phone. Well, it's time to call BS, because as you can clearly see, depending upon the mobile network operator, it's quite possible that the person who owned this phone may have had to link a credit card to it, and may have linked a credit card to it to be able to top it off, to be able to get more minutes for the next month. It may be that they bought a similar top-off card, and it also may have been possible at the time to link the numbers, because those things are like credit cards. They have unique numbers on them, to trace those back if that pop-up card was indeed bought with a credit card. If it wasn't paid for with cash, it may have been possible even still to correlate a person's name as the one who bought the top-off card if they indeed bought a credit card. But okay, but that was clearly not followed up on. Important point, just because someone calls it a burner doesn't mean actually it was used that way. So it is quite possible at the time that they could have come up with a name of the person who bought the phone, the name of the person who topped off the phone, and for sure they could have gotten the phone number. And boy, there are a lot of questions about phone records in this case. And wouldn't it be great? Wouldn't it just put it to bed if we had a phone number for this phone that we could correlate against the numbers that we have for Teresa, for Ryan, for Stephen, and just put this to bed in our minds. One last thing that I wanted to mention about this phone, that's in the manual, and I don't have a cut of the slide. I don't have a cut of the manual for this piece. Sorry about that. Was that this phone actually is not capable of being locked by a pin, as we know our phones today. Today you can set a personal identification number that's usually people use 4 digits, but you could use 6 or in some phones even 8 digits to be able to lock your phone. This Audiovox phone, as were many of the flip phones at the time, you weren't able to set a PIN number. So you could turn it on and you could get right at the last number dialed, you could get right at the texts for this phone, you could get right at any information of this phone that you wanted to, including the phone number through the right set of keystrokes, without having to know any sort of PIN. Did they try and turn this phone on? Could we still turn this phone on? All that stuff remains to be seen and is completely unknown. So in summary, this Audiovox phone was found on November 8th by Pam of God and John Campion. Very interestingly, it was found in the vicinity of where a car matching the description of Teresa's RAV4 was reported by no less than 4 people. The model number for this phone, CDM8815 UT StarCam, as reported in the CASO, is not a valid Audiovox phone number. Was this deliberate obfuscation on the part of law enforcement? We don't know. This phone was likely bought from a company referred to as a mobile virtual network operator, or MVNO. An example of an MVNO is Cellcom, is a phone MVNO that operates out of Green Bay. We know about this company from the CASO. The Averys preferred to use this phone according to one report in the CASO. It's very possible that there was a credit card linked to this phone. That's how you top the minutes off. It's possible that it was the card that you may have used to top off the minutes on the phone was linkable to a name. The Audiovox phone likely operated on the Verizon cellular network, and for sure, Verizon would have had the capability to link the identifiers from the back of the phone, like we showed in the presentation, to a phone number that we could have looked and compared against the cellular phone records we have. It's unclear as to whether they could still do that from a phone from the 2005 timeframe, but I wouldn't be surprised if they could. Well, that's all we have for today, and I'd like to thank you for tuning in. I'd also like to thank all of the other foul play researchers who've provided just a lot of stimulating input, who are a great bunch of people, and make an awesome team of researchers. Thank you very much for your participation and for allowing me into your group. This has been a Foul Play production.